Get this started. Okay, here we have Vendula Vespalcova.
Vespalcova, yeah.
Almost
done.
Vendula is a third-year PhD student from the University of Masaryk in the Czech Republic. As you can tell, she's working on missile defence in Czech Republic and Poland for her PhD. She did bachelor's and master's degrees in international relations at the same university, and both her previous dissertations are also in missile defence, so you can clearly see a theme here. Her additional research interests include strategic culture and transatlantic relations, and fitting nicely into Interpol culture, Vendula likes cooking and baking to relieve stress. So, well, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Bladen. Thank you all for coming today. Before I actually turn to the subject matter of our today's session, I would like to first introduce a bit more the place where I'm coming from, because you probably have never heard of my university. So I live and study in Brno, which is the second largest city of the Czech Republic. Its population is almost 400,000, and Brno is home to 5 universities. Masaryk University is the largest of them. It was established in 1919, and it's named after the first Czechoslovak president, Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk. Currently, Masaryk University is the second largest one in the country. It's educating over 40,000 students at 9 faculties. My faculty, which you can see in the down on the left down, my faculty of Social Studies, was established in 1997, and the Department of International Relations and European Studies is even younger. It was established in 2002. As you can see from the number of the staff, we are a rather small department, but we are doing our best. We are trying, we are growing, and we are learning from the best. And that's also why I'm here. That's why we are sending our PhD students to Aberystwyth to learn something new. So, now let's move to the actual content of my presentation. In my presentation today, I will talk about a story which is pretty much closed now. But anyway, it is a story of a George W. Bush missile defense plan, which was never implemented, but despite this, it was a significant security political issue for the 2 Central European countries involved. I will try to show you today how the Czech Republic and Poland dealt with this security policy issue, how they dealt with the negotiations, and also I will move to what I call Obama's turn, to the fact that the following administration of Barack Obama cancelled George Bush's plan, and what was the impact of this on bilateral relations of the Czech Republic and Poland to the United States. My presentation is based on on the research which I've done for my master thesis, and for this research I conducted roughly 15 interviews with the Czech and Polish representatives from the missile defense negotiation teams, from respective ministries. I also talked to several people from academia, from think tanks, and so on. So I dare to say that I got first-hand information which allowed me to make quite a complex and comprehensive picture of the negotiations. Obviously, because of the time which I have for my presentation today, I cannot go into all the details, but if you're really fluent in Czech, you can read my master thesis. Anyway, to the actual content of my presentation. First, I will give you a short background on the project of the third side of the missile defense in Central Europe. Then I will briefly talk you through the course of negotiations in the Czech Republic and then in Poland and compare those processes. I think this is quite important because even though you may think that these two countries have a lot in common, they have to a large extent common history, they didn't treat the negotiation and the missile defense as such. They didn't treat it in the same way. So I want to point out the differences and also mention the main motives which were driving the countries through the negotiations and why they actually negotiated the way they did. Then I will briefly mention some implications of the Obama turn, and in the very end just have a few notes on the wider picture. Basically, I will share some ideas with you on how I think the Central European BMD adventure has influenced the project of NATO ballistic missile defense. So, briefly, to the project of Third Site as such. After the United States withdrew from the ABM Treaty in 2002, they started deploying their nationwide ballistic missile defense system. The system was supposed to have also a European part, which was called the Ballistic Missile Defense European Capability, and in short, it was also known as the Third Site. The first two sites were situated in Fort Greely, Alaska, and Vandenberg, California. Those are two interceptor sites in the US. The plan for the third site consisted of three main components. First was supposed to be interceptor site with 10 two-stage ground-based interceptors, GBIs, also known as the George Bush Interceptor. Second component was the mid-course radar, and the third component was supposed to be transportable forward deployed radar. Now I'm obviously going to talk only about the two stationary components, as the third one is transportable, so it wasn't really an issue where to actually place that. Originally, the radar base and the GBI base were supposed to be located in one country together. And the question was whether it be Poland or Czech Republic or any other Central Eastern European country. However, later on, the preference or the idea has arisen that maybe it would be good to actually divide the components and deploy them separately. Where exactly did this idea come from is not clear. However, during my interviews, the Czech former Minister of Foreign Affairs confessed that it was probably him who convinced the Americans to do this. But the general idea is that the division of the two components was because of engaging more allies into this project, and therefore expressing that it's not about the United States building unique bilateral relationship to any particular country, but that they basically wanted to engage more allies into their BMD project. The very first consultations between United States and the Central European countries ran in around 2002, but those were mostly technical consultations. The official negotiation process began in 2007 on the 19th of January, when the US diplomatic notes arrived to Prague and to Warsaw, requesting the beginning of negotiations. So the official start of negotiations on the 19th of January 2007. Let's now move to the Czech Republic and how the negotiations were going on there. Well, to put it very simply, I can characterize the whole process by one word: division. The radar question has divided both the public and also the political stage. Within the public, the radar question really stirred up unprecedented emotions, both positive and negative. The public has basically split up into two groups, which were hostile to each other. But interestingly enough, they were both referring to some historical experience. The group of advocates of radar, they were referring to United States as liberators of our country. United States liberated, or well, more or less, thanks to President Wilson, our country actually got independence in 1918. In the Second World War, Americans helped to defeat Germans. And they also helped to defeat Russians in the Cold War. So for a part of the Czech population, United States are seen as the liberators to whom we have a lot to be grateful for. And therefore, we should have accepted the radar without any hesitations. On the other hand, there was a group of radar opponents who were also referring to historical experience, but this time to the experience of Soviet occupation, which lasted for roughly 20 years, from 1968 to 1989. And the memory of foreign army being present on the territory of the country was so strong that part of the population basically didn't want to repeat this experience. And that's why they opposed the radar. They didn't want any soldiers, whether it be American or Russian or whoever. This was their line of argumentation. If you'd be really interested in the public mood or in the atmosphere in the country, I strongly recommend a documentary which is called The Czech Peace. And it really shows how the society and ordinary people, how they were feeling about the whole situation and what was going on in the country. It's a very, on one hand, it's a fun movie or fun documentary, but actually everything you would see happened. So very interesting, strongly recommend that one. So this was the division on the level of general public, but also the political stage was divided. On one hand, there was the ruling coalition, the governmental coalition. On the other hand, the opposition, and especially the voice of social democrats was heard really loudly. The social democrats were referring to the fact that the majority of the population was opposing the radar, and they really urged for a referendum to be held on this question. They also criticized the government for unquestioning obedience to the United States, and more importantly, for fooling the public into believing that there is actual some Iranian ballistic missile threat. Social Democrats basically believed that the claim there is some threat out there was exaggerated, and they rather supported the idea that missile defense was built more progressively, more slowly, and for sure on a multilateral base, not on a bilateral relationship with the United States, rather within NATO. But this was not the only division line on the political stage. There was also a division within the ruling coalition. The Civic Democrats and Christian Democrats were willing to accept the US radar without any objections, without any conditions, whereas the Green Party wanted the whole project to be, so to say, multilateralized. In the reply to the January US diplomatic note, the Greens pressed a clause which was saying, the Czech Republic informs the United States that the Czech Republic will pursue integration of the radar base into the future NATO BMD architecture. And that's exactly what the Czech diplomats were fighting for, especially at the April 2008 Bucharest summit, Bucharest NATO summit. Their efforts resulted in a few sentences in the final summit declaration, in which NATO recognized the substantial contribution to the protection of allies provided by the planned deployment of European-based United States missile defense assets. And NATO also promised to be exploring ways to link this capability with current NATO missile defense efforts as a way to ensure that it would be an integral part of any future NATO-wide missile defense architecture. So this kind of vague statement in the declaration, for some people within the Green Party was just enough. But there was another faction within the Green Party which was saying, sorry, this is not enough, and they were hesitant to actually support the final US-Czech agreement during the ratification process. In the end, however, there was no ratification because the agreement was never being put to the ratification process in the parliament, but they didn't know at that time. So not only had the government to deal with the opposition and public, they also had to deal with an enemy in their own coalition. Moving to the Poland. Generally speaking, in Poland, missile defense was welcomed much more warmly from the beginning. And the reason was that Poles saw missile defense as a great opportunity to finally make their long-term dream come true and to host American soldiers on their territory. Why did they want American soldiers on their territory? Poland felt, and maybe still feels, as a second-class NATO member. And that's for two reasons. The first reason is the NATO-Russia Council Founding Act, according to which there were no nukes, no troops, and no military installations on the territories of new NATO members. Second reason, Poland felt really unsecure because of the lack of contingency planning with regards to Article 5. And this quote kind of illustrates how they feel about so-called NATO guarantees. And that's why they always wanted to have US military presence on their territory, as they hoped that in case of some security crisis, Americans will come and help us. Other than that, the course of Polish-US negotiations was rather smooth from the beginning, but then it was interrupted by Polish parliamentary elections. In October 2007, in the parliamentary elections, the governmental and opposition parties swapped, which brought about a sharp change in the negotiation style. The new Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, was far more tough in his negotiations. He demanded much more from the United States, and especially he was referring to more and more additional security guarantees. By the end of June 2008, the negotiations seemed to be almost done, but out of a sudden Donald Tusk decided to reject the final US offer, claiming that it doesn't provide enough additional security guarantees to Poland. Unfortunately, Donald Tusk had rather bad timing. He made his decision public on the 4th of July, which really pissed off Americans. Anyway, the final agreement was reached about a month later. And here comes the interesting information which I get from one of my interviews with the chief Polish negotiator, Witold Wasikowski. He told me that basically within the month there was no actual substantial change in the agreement. Basically, the only changes were cosmetic in the wording of the agreement, but nothing really has changed. And Wasikowski claimed that the real reasons for Tusk's rejection on the 4th of July were mostly prestigious. He basically wanted to gain more political prestige for his government. He wanted to play the tough guy and to get more from Americans, and therefore get more credit and look as a really as the bad guy. Anyway, the most apparent or the most probably important demand which Poles had and which they finally got was a Patriot battery, which was coming to Poland from Germany. It was provided by the United States just for training purposes, but it was a symbol of something, even though in practice it was basically useless, and the Polish soldiers weren't even allowed to basically touch it. They could only watch American soldiers how to operate the Patriots, but still it was something which symbolized the strength of Polish requirements. If I had to compare the Czech and Polish approaches to negotiations, in the Czech Republic, the question of ballistic missile defense was rather political, and it was whether to say yes or whether to say no. The main division line ran between the government and the opposition, and the main topic, the motto, was multilateralization, basically getting missile defense on the NATO level. In Poland, ballistic missile defense negotiations were more of the trade or business character. It was about how much do we want in reward for our acceptance of the US missile base. And there were two opinions or two approaches to the negotiation. Kaczynski government, the one which started the negotiations, was rather, they didn't care that much. They were willing to accept basically whatever US offer, whereas Donald Tusk government was more pushy and negotiating a lot harder. And he focused on gaining not only the missile base, but more and more benefits in terms of additional security guarantees. From the analysis which I made in my thesis and which I wasn't able to give you now, today, it seems that there were four common motives for both Czech Republic and Poland for their engagement into the negotiations, but these motives were present in different extent. I would say that for the Czech Republic, the primary motive was probably of becoming a member of some elite club of US friends and closer allies. There was also a geopolitical dimension, basically by anchoring the country deeper into the Western security community. But this geopolitical dimension wasn't wasn't manifested loudly. But within my interviews, a member of the Czech negotiation team admitted that yes, there was a geopolitical reason we wanted to have the US flag on our territory and show that we belong to the West. Czech Republic also wanted and gained some wider benefits such as R&D, cooperation in defense industry and so on, but none of these benefits were put as a condition for their acceptance of the radar. It was just a pleasant side effect. To what extent did actually anyone perceive a ballistic missile threat is not clear. The story of ballistic missile threat was a way how to sell the missile defense to the public. The government was stressing the presence of the bad Iran, of the missiles, of the threat, but whether actually someone believed in this threat is unclear. In Poland, the underlying motive was geopolitical. And it was also connected with the motive of getting wider benefits, which were mostly of, so to say, materialistic nature and more connected to the classic hard security understanding of any kind of security. Why does Poland, or why did Poland, or does perceive the need of being secured more militarily? Well, this is the answer I got. As you can see, Poland still feels or basically perceives its own security in the traditional geopolitical hard dimension. And it seems to be the main reason why Poland acted the way it acted in those negotiations. Whether there was any motivation in terms of the elite club membership or perceiving actual missile threat, it doesn't seem to be the case, but of course could have been, but I would say those two motives would have been really minor. So, negotiations with George Bush administration concluded. So Barack Obama comes into office. As a part of his reset policy, he also reset the missile defense project, which basically meant that the third side was cancelled, no radar for the Czech Republic, and Aegis missiles, Aegis ships, and SM-3 missiles for the Poland instead of George Bush interceptors. Barack Obama announced his decision to the Czech and Polish prime ministers on the 17th of September 2009, which in Poland is the 60th anniversary of the Soviet attack on Polish territory during the Second World War. So again, perfect timing. The Obama decision was kind of symptomatic for the US policy towards Europe in general at that time. The proponents of missile defense in Czech Republic and Poland felt really, really disappointed. Disappointed, abandoned, left behind, left at the mercy of Russia again. And basically, the general mood was that the United States were losing interest in Europe and in Central Europe in particular. It has to be reminded that Central Europe since 1990s was a focal point for the United States because these countries were being integrated into NATO, so they were enjoying all the focus and all the focus of US foreign policy, whereas now they felt a bit, as I said, abandoned. The feeling of abandonment was so strong that even words such as treason, betrayal appeared, not only in this Polish tabloid but also elsewhere. However, there was also another side of the coin. There was also a group of people who understood the Polish decision as a kind of, US decision as a kind of natural development, as a natural course of action, because, as I said, the Central European countries were already integrated into NATO, into European Union, so the security was solved. And therefore, the US decision was seen as a fair enough, new administration, new policy, why not? But the majority opinion was rather the first one. In terms of bilateral relations between United States and Poland, United States and the Czech Republic, for the Central European countries this was definitely a lesson learned. They've reminded themselves that United States are the stronger one in this relationship, that the relationship is asymmetric, and that it's United States who decides what and when will be talked about and what are their actual interests. As a consequence of this, the very pro-American focus of Czech and Polish foreign policy has shifted a bit more towards the EU, especially in the Polish context. This is not to say that Poland or Czech Republic would have become anti-American. No, not at all. But I would say they've become more realistic or more aware of the fact that probably European Union is now much closer to them than the United States, and if they want something, they rather go to Brussels than to Washington. In Poland, there were more reasons for this, not only the missile defense, but also the experience with the war in Iraq, and also the question of visa for Polish citizens to the United States. Poles were for many years striving for not to have visa, but Americans were really reluctant to cancel this policy. So, finally, what does this all mean from the point of view of NATO ballistic missile defense? Well, NATO started exploring its options with regards to ballistic missile defense system in 2002 at the NATO summit in Prague, where the so-called feasibility study was launched. And the feasibility study, after a few years, concluded that a missile defense system which would cover the whole of NATO territory is technically feasible. However, besides the feasibility study, nothing really has been done in this regard on the level of NATO. Nothing has been done until 2008 summit in Bucharest. Fair enough, George Bush, when he was making his plan for the national missile defense, he admitted the possible future integration of the third site into any future NATO BMD architecture. And I personally believe this would have come true at some point. But I also believe, and I'm fully aware of the fact that the following claim cannot be scientifically proved, but I believe that the course of negotiation with the Czech Republic, and especially the requirement or the demand for multilateralization of the project, has kind of revived or accelerated the discussions and discussion and planning and decision making on missile defense on the NATO level. Also, it seems to me that the Obama's plan of European phased adaptive approach, which was explicitly put as a US contribution to the future NATO BMD architecture, I would say this was a second important impetus for the NATO BMD system. And right now it seems that European NATO members seem to actually have embraced the idea of missile defense and seem to be engaged in it now and seem to be working on it, no matter what United States. So we'll see how it goes, and fingers crossed, and I'll tell you when I'm done with my PhD. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Okay.